Thank you for joining me on.
And we'll have to cut away from Gene Parker's interview with Jane Tolino on Disability Radio Worldwide. A great example of the kind of programming you've come to expect from Disability Radio, the personal, the political, very powerful story by Gene Tolino there on Disability Radio Worldwide. You hear the program every Sunday afternoon from 5 to 5:30 here on KGNU Boulder. Antithesis is just ahead, and Leo and Richard are in the studio ready for the show. But first of all, guys, we want to thank a few people. Thanks to Sean from Boulder, who became a new member.
Hey, Sean.
Welcome, Sean.
Thanks, Sean.
He liked This American Life, also liked Indian Voices a bit earlier, and the first time he ever tuned in, it says, was Friday night. So heard KGNU and wanted to sign up. Thanks a lot, Sean.
And we also want to thank Steve, who loves KGNU, and he wanted a book.
Yeah, he wanted that David Sedaris book, and so did Jamie from Boulder. Jamie Teague, our Sunday afternoon news host. She likes This American Life. Thanks, Jamie. So good to hear from folks on a Sunday afternoon. Now we're waiting to hear from you at 449-4885 or 1-800-737-3030.
Pick up those phones and call in, because if you don't, well, gee whiz, if you don't, we're just going to be sitting here, and we're going to be talking. We're going to be talking anyway, because that's what we do. Isn't that right?
That's right, that's what we do. But we'd rather talk about, something topical as opposed to phones.
And the whole idea with the kind of talk that you're going to be hearing for a while, anyhow, on Sundays from 5:30 to 6 o'clock, is a kind of talk that sort of brings it home and kind of brings things down to where they're really at. We wanted to take a slightly different approach to the way those talk things go, so what do you say, Richard? For those of you that have never heard Antithesis, let's give them a taste of what the show's really like, and this is how it usually starts. Good afternoon, and welcome to Antithesis.
Antithesis is a weekly radio soiree of stimulating commentary and entertaining conversation, discussing issues of importance in our daily lives.
Antithesis airs Sunday afternoon at 5:30.
I'm Richard Curtis.
I'm Leo Griep-Ruiz.
The opinions expressed on Antithesis are the opinions of the person speaking them,
and do not necessarily represent the views of the board, staff, or management of KGNU or of us here at Antithesis.
because I might not agree with him.
And I might not agree with him.
So this would be the part where one of us has
That
something
one of
to
us
say.
reads something, yeah.
Oh, okay.
We'll explain for those of you that are kind of new to what we do here that Richard and I kind of came together around another show, Hemispheres, and we got to realize, wait a minute, we are like two poles. We represent, in a sense, two poles of the, what do we call it, the extreme of the movement.
That's us.
And
We're the poles.
well, Richard, why don't you tell them what your particular piece of the extreme of the movement is?
Oh, my particular piece?
Yeah.
Oh, my particular piece would be the traditionalist European piece.
Yeah, which is?
That scientific socialism thing.
Which is?
Or organized struggle.
Known
and labor
as?
unions. Oh, communism.
There we go. Richard is
You got
the
me
chair.
to say it.
I got him to say it. Richard is the chair of the Colorado, is it chapter? Is
District.
That the district of the Communist Party,
USA.
CPUSA. And I, on the other hand, am not. But,
That's true. Just
we're-
a freelance troublemaker.
Well, actually, I'm on the board of the National Chicano Human Rights Council, which has been representing Chicanos as indigenous people before groups like the United Nations Human Rights Commission, where, as we speak, we have delegates credentialed as part of the International Indian Treaty Council delegation at the Human Rights Commission of the United Nations in Geneva, Switzerland. So this is for real. We're a real accredited, genuine council of people who do work around various areas relating to human rights from an indigenous sovereignty perspective all throughout the colonized territories. And you see, at this point in the show, normally Richard or I, we trade off. We'll read something that we've written. I'm very fortunate in that the Colorado Daily is running a column of mine more or less on a weekly basis, and I also write for a magazine out of Toronto, Aboriginal Voices. And Richard also does writing and commentaries, and he will read one or I will read one, and then the other guy will tear it up.
Tear it up.
Just rip it up, in the hopes of kind of taking the discussion around these issues into another area. Now, instead of one of the columns, which is what I usually do, I'm going to give you this is the speech that I was asked to speak yesterday at the End the Politics of Cruelty rally concerning police brutality and related issues. So I'm going to do that, and then we're going to tear it up. And in the meantime, we want to ask you to please call this radio station and please become a member. The rule of thumb around community radio is that 10% of the people who listen subscribe. That means 10% of the people that listen actually give money. And we would kind of like to raise that a little bit because KGNU is the best. I got to say that after years of being involved in radio, that KGNU is just what's happening.
Well, and I think we need to recognize, too, that there are probably a lot of people out there who already are members. They either pledged in the fall or they've already pledged so far in the drive, and we know you're out there, and we want to thank you. But we suspect there are a couple of you, at least, haven't pledged yet,
Yep.
and we need you to do it.
Please do it. And the phone numbers are
449-4885 or
800-370.
737.
Oh,
800-737.
3030. I always remember the 30.
There's a 3030 in there.
Yeah, there's a 3030 is one of my favorite parts of that phone number. The death of Patrolman Randy Herrera was a senseless tragedy. It is sad when a young person dies needlessly. His death should remind us of all of the innocent bystanders who have died just as sensibly as the result. Excuse me, I read that wrong. His death should remind us of all of the innocent bystanders who have died just as senselessly as the result of police high-speed chases and under other questionable circumstances. But it's not enough to grieve and mourn. We should examine the cause of the problem in order to avoid similar tragedies in the future. Asians make up about 3% of the population within the current borders of the United States of America. Africans in America, about 10%. If we combine persons both with and without tribal registry, including the ones exculturated from our traditional communities, that is, Chicanos and certain others, indigenous peoples make up at least 13% of the population. 3 plus 10 plus 13 makes the total non-white percentage of the population roughly 26%. Whites, therefore, are about 74%. In other words, whites outnumber non-whites by more or less 3-1. All things being equal, which of course they're not, there should be 3 times as much videotape of white folks getting stomped by the cops than there is of non-whites getting stomped by the cops, but this is not the case. Can we attribute this to more people of color owning camcorders? I don't think so. We've got the most recent tape of the young black man being kicked and slammed twice onto a gurney by Denver police and paramedics. There's the now famous tape of Rodney King. There was the case of the black journalist getting shoved by cops into a plate glass window. There was the incident of the southern black churchwoman pulled out of her car and knocked to the ground by a foul-mouthed, gun-brandishing sheriff. There was the Chicano teenager bludgeoned in front of his terrified sister, also in L.A. And don't forget the Mexican man and woman senselessly bleeding bloody on the side of the freeway by Riverside County sheriffs outside of their jurisdiction. This is a recent total of 7 non-Anglos savaged on videotape by adrenaline and testosterone-intoxicated thugs who sadistically sublimate their insecurities by imposing their pathetically violent authority with a long, heavy, stiff, hard, phallic fetish whenever they can get it up in their 2 hands to smash at helpless human beings until the victim's bowels involuntarily evacuate and, beyond panic, they are capable of only the reptilian brainstem functions expressed as, "Oh God, just let me crawl under a car or a rock or a Kleenex or anything." White folks are, of course, also victims of police violence. Take the case of the young white man killed last year just a few blocks south of the state capitol on Broadway, and there is the case of the elder white woman a couple of years ago who was killed by the cops whom she called to protect her from her drunken son. Because they're both dead, we can only conjecture about whether they felt immune from police brutality, because we tend to associate police brutality with victims of color. I think it's important to acknowledge that there are rare occasions when violence by the police is justified. I ain't no chump. I know that there are some real criminals out there, and anyone who pulls a gun on the cops for sociopathic or political reasons should expect to get shot at. Che Guevara complained about social conditions, not about getting shot at. As a person who understands that he is one of a colonized people, I want to make it clear that I have no illusions about the role of the police as an army of occupation. I also understand that there are times when it is entirely appropriate for anyone listening to this, to call upon the services of the state's authorized technicians of violence. That's who the police are. They are the state's authorized technicians of violence. If you are not prepared to deal with a sociopath breaking down your front door and inflicting violence in your face, you have every right to tap 911 and pray that the cops get there on time. Of course, while you're at it, you better pray that when they show up, they don't shoot you. I'm not going to dwell on the issue of the fundamental legitimacy of police authority because that discussion raises the question of the legitimacy of the state which credentials them. It's enough to say that the United States of America claims its authority over its current land base as the result of contractual agreements with this land's indigenous peoples. We all know that every one of those contracts, called treaties when they are between sovereign nations, have been violated at every opportunity by the United States government. Our concern today is the abuse of the public by police officers under color of authority. Ironic, isn't it, that if a person in a position of authority sexually abuses a child, the punishment is more severe than if the abuse is at the hands of a common person? Why is it, then, that officers of the law who violate civil and human rights under color of authority are not brought up on charges with punishments more severe than those faced by common citizens for similar acts of violence? I ask this question, remembering the time that I witnessed L.A. cops laughing and slapping each other on the back as they shot tear gas canisters at the feet of black-shawled Mexican grandmothers who ran away screaming down the streets of East L.A., clutching at a flock of panic-stricken children like mother hens with their chicks fleeing a pack of rabid dogs. In contrast to that experience, I want to acknowledge one of the finest gentlemen I know, un caballero verdadero, the former sheriff of Costilla County in the San Luis Valley, Don Ernesto Sandoval. He exemplifies the finest tradition of dignified community policing, and I am honored to know him. As long as there are human beings upon this earth, there will be individuals who commit horrible deeds which we would all rather not think about, until each and every one of us is capable and prepared to deal with sociopathic violent behavior. Society will need hired guns. And because they are empowered to use lethal violence, we must expect much more of those hired guns than we do of the ordinary person on the street. We are obviously in need of an effective police review board with the authority to subpoena witnesses, evidence, and testimony, and to find cause for indictment in proceedings similar to a coroner's inquest, and we need laws which will hold police officers to the higher standards of behavior which they themselves claim to embody as the thin blue line between decency and lawlessness. In the meantime, I will continue to wonder about where's the videotapes of all the white folks getting their heads bent. I mean, if the ratio of whites to non-whites in this country is 3-to-1, there should be tape of at least 20 white folks getting stomped for the 7 recent people of color stompings which we know about. Or could it be that sociopathic psycho cops are not equal opportunity thumpers? This could seriously erode my confidence in the American way of life. There you go.
That's what you want to talk about.
Yeah, that's what I'd like to talk about. Well, sort of. You know, I kind of figured
Police brutality.
Well, I don't think we really need to talk about that. I'm a little more interested, actually, in the discussion between you and me going toward that area that I said I wasn't going to dwell on, which has to do with the fundamental legitimacy of police authority, and even more so, perhaps, the fundamental legitimacy of the state which credentials them. Because if I have things right as a representative of a political party in this country, that's part of the deal that you want to be involved in.
The legitimacy of the state apparatus.
Well, basically, yeah. That am I wrong in saying that by being involved in that electoral process to some extent, that is a de facto legitimization of a state, which that political tendency, I guess, that I represent in terms of our discussions says is illegitimate colonizing power.
That's true. It does. It does. And you know, it's strange because for me, you know, I look at what you do, and it strikes me as romantic. That it has a principle to it, and it's kind of poetic. But
the romance of exoticism and primitivism.
Well, I don't know about primitivism, but because it's sort of sophisticated in the end, you know. But I don't see the value of calling into question the legitimacy of the state.
I would say that it's of value at a number of levels, not the least of which is an understanding of the history, and that we are involved in long-term not just multi-generational, but transgenerational struggle. All empires expand, by definition, or they wouldn't be empires.
Yeah.
And, in turn, historically, there is a great lesson to be learned in the fact that all empires contract.
Right,
cave in.
but we're not talking about a colony. You know, Colorado doesn't think of itself. The majority of people in Colorado don't think of themselves as being in a colony. So I'm not sure that the analogy, well, people in the Philippines may think of themselves, or Guam, think of themselves, and to a lesser extent, I can see the value of raising that discussion in Hawaii, but in Colorado, I don't see the value.
Well, in Hawaii, it's star number 50. Alaska was star number 49. And I'm not sure which star is Colorado's star, but it certainly came sometime after 13.
Yeah.
Just the flag itself is documentation of the fact that, when we think of imperialism, we tend to think of those areas that the United States has involved itself in outside of its borders, but it has always involved itself in areas outside of its current borders in its quest to add yet another trophy star to its flag.
Well, but you're sort of assuming that the genesis of any political state in a sort of current or recent historical context could be legitimate on your terms. It could be moral on your terms. And
yeah.
I would suggest that notion is fundamentally flawed. And so to apply that standard to the United States as it's currently constructed is of no real value. That we need to set our sights on tangible goals for human beings, and the abstraction of the legitimacy of the state is of no value to the real life experience of human beings.
From
in
a
their
view within the barrios, certainly the kinds of issues that we deal with are issues which are best understood in the context of colonialism. If we don't see things in that context of colonialism, then we have this idea that we're just not people as good as other people, or we would not have a lowering, a decreasing average life expectancy compared to the fact that white people in this country have an increasing life expectancy.
Oh, I don't think that's implied at all.
Oh.
I mean, I think the question is who has power. I mean, regardless of where you are, where you situate yourself, barrio, whatever, because the power exists on a lot of levels. The question is power. Who has the power, and is that power applied democratically? Obviously, it's not. So it strikes me that the real question is not the legitimacy of the state of Colorado and the position of the governor, but who the governor is, and perhaps changing that.
When I say the state, no, I'm not merely speaking.
Oh, I realize you mean state.
I'm using state
in the national. I mean,
of
I
nation
know.
state.
I'm just pulling that example
as long
out.
as we're speaking of power, let us remind the listeners that they have the power to pick up the telephone.
The power to keep KGNU going.
The power to keep KGNU going by calling 449-4885 or
1-800-737-3030. The other thing too, we usually talk about special little, gifts that we have for people who pledge the premiums.
What kind of premiums do we have?
As a special token of the nature of Antithesis, we have no particular premiums. But actually, the station has been collecting CDs from music companies and books from publishers all over for this special purpose. Those companies in their corporate mindedness donate these things, which we then talk about if we know what they are in particular, or in general in this case. And people who pledge during Antithesis are encouraged to come down to the station and just browse through the collection of very, very interesting CDs and books to see if there's something that strikes your fancy that you'd like to take home as a premium.
Because we really do care about the listeners.
Well, that's why we're here.
That's why we're here.
It's all about listeners.
All, I mean, if it was just a matter of Richard and me talking about these things, among ourselves, we could easily do that. Especially now that I'm online.
Oh. Or in a bar somewhere.
Yeah.
Where you could smoke cigars.
I could smoke cigars.
I mean, it couldn't be in Boulder, of course, but, well, maybe we could.
Yeah.
Find one of those special...
And you could drink alcohol.
Sure. I could do that.
See, I don't do that.
Right. Well, I don't smoke cigars.
Anymore.
Anyway,
well,
back to the state.
Back to the issue, yeah. I really see the issue of colonization as being very important for a number of reasons, and one of those reasons is that there are many, many other people around this planet who share the condition of Chicanos, which is the condition of institutionalized alienation from our homelands, and also having an idea toward long-term struggle, which I think is something that, I find it ironic that Marx and Engels published the Communist Manifesto in the same year that the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was issued, 1848.
Uh-huh.
And because of that, a view that what was relevant in terms of social analysis at that time, I think that what was relevant in 1848 in terms of that particular treaty is also really important. We have to ask, where do we go? Do we allow violated treaties to merely be treated as dead letters? Or do we demand some consistency over the state?
On what authority do you make the demand? I mean, see, that's my point, is that in the end, the whole thing rests on a question of authority from somewhere or another. And if you reject the legitimacy of the state, then it makes it impossible to affect power and the way power is wielded inside the state. And there is no effective authority outside the state. So where are you left?
I think that the process of developing an effective authority is something which at this point exists as many small nuclei. There are many small centers of communities developing more or less autonomous functions. And I think that also at this time, with the state refusing to provide relevant education to our youth, and with all of the many other lacks of appropriate social services, that we see more and more people understanding the need to develop alternative systems to deliver those services, and that in that process we began creating the infrastructure for a government in domestic exile. There was a time when no PLO existed. There was a time when no African National Congress existed. There was a time...
Well, wait. You've used those examples in our conversations before, and I categorically reject your use of those examples.
Okay, let's use the PLO example.
Well, because the Palestinians existing in a particular geographic area overwhelmingly recognized the legitimacy of the PLO's claim,
and
as is true with the ANC.
Now, there was a day when there was no PLO, right? There was a day sometime in the past when people looked around and they saw no PLO.
They all agreed that the state of Israel did not have legitimate claim to the land that it was claiming.
And there was a process of educating. There was a process of agitating. Yeah. There was a process of organizing.
Well, the difference in Colorado, for example, or in the United States generally, is that the majority of people accept the legitimacy of the state.
We see those demographics changing.
They are not going to change to over 50%. It is simply not going to be the case.
The demographics are changing. Let's you mentioned Hawaii. Now, the way that Hawaii became a part of the United States is because the settlers came in until they overwhelmed the native population. Then they threw an election, which they got to vote and said, do we want to be a part of something? And then they got to be a part of something, right?
Well, and we wanted Hawaii away from the Japanese,
and
who had colonized it first.
I had a brief conversation with the former governor of Colorado, Richard Lamb, a couple years ago, in which I said to him, well, gee whiz, what we thought a generation ago we were going to have to do with guns, we're doing with demographics.
I don't think it's really happening.
Well, it is.
I mean, numbers are going to increase, and as you cite the statistics about the growth of non-white populations in the United States, and that I know it drives the right-wing, supremacist fringe batty, but whites are going to become a minority, and we might as well learn to live with that. That doesn't mean that a majority of those people, because of their non-white, color, will reject the legitimacy of the United States of America. In other words, the current
borders of the United States are immutable and nothing will ever change.
Whatever will change because of changes in power. So what I'm talking about is addressing power as it's currently constituted in order to make real change.
And what I'm talking about is really two things. One of them is addressing power from the grassroots level, where there is going to be some kind of change, and there are certain steps which have to be taken historically. And
Leo, come on. To the degree that you were actually successful, the state would simply start assassinating leaders of the movement, and that's what they did in the 1970s and 1960s.
And we are seeing now a different form of organizing, with people really avoiding the presence of charismatic leaders. That's certainly been one of those lessons of the 60s, 70s, 80s, not just here but around the world.
Okay, but still, Still,
and what I'm talking about
if you don't take power, then you're going to be subject to power.
And what I'm talking about now are the processes of perhaps not even laying the foundation, or maybe not even clearing the ground, but at least seeing where the ground is viable for creating a new form of structure.
Well, but why is it too that Native peoples should be concerned only about Native people?
I don't think that that's really the case. I do think that a most important issue that most political parties... Oh, station ID time.
God. Okay, that's true. Station ID time. You're listening to KGNU Boulder, 88.5 FM, with translator K260AC in Fort Collins, Colorado, at 99.9 megahertz, and translator K229AC in Ward, Colorado, at 93.7 megahertz.
Let me, what's that? Is that the end?
Oh my God,
That is the end. Let me just say this, that there are people on this land who are of an unbroken lineage with those ancestors who came to know themselves as a people upon this land, and that I hold that they are the ones who have the highest level of moral authority in dealing with these political issues, and we stand behind them when they lead, and we stand in front of them when they face a threat.
And I say we all have equal moral authority.
Okay.
Okay.
I don't agree with you.
I know, and I don't agree with you.
That's why it's called Antithesis.
That's the nature of the show. Ooh,
I
Sam's
say-
back.
And hey, here's
I
Sam.
say call 449-4885 or 1-800-737-3030 for interesting conversation, for international news from the BBC, for music from all over the world. For whatever reasons you tune to KGNU, we need to hear from you now.
A lot.
A lot.
So call
a
that
lot.
number. $100,000 is a lot of money to raise out of your good sense, your good-heartedness out there. So this is your chance to be a part of this thin tissue of electricity that bonds us as the greater KGNU family.
And coming up now, we have the BBC.